Fair Housing Friday of Fair Housing Month. So thank you for joining us. The Fair Housing Friday series is something that we developed in 2020, go figure, when we had to move all of our programming quite suddenly online. And we found the Fair Housing Friday space to be a really good opportunity to invite discussions, more creative discussions around housing and kind of like dig into more niche topics, invite different voices to the table to think about how housing intersects with other parts of our lives, and really just make it as a space where it's inviting for the community. So we've always really appreciated the kind of investment folks will have in the Q&A, but also in the opportunity that it gives us just to reimagine our housing space and how we talk about housing. And so I'll just start by introducing myself and the Fair Housing Project. The Fair Housing Project is part of the Champlain Valley of Economic Opportunity, CVOEO. And I'm Corinne Yantz. I'll be the facilitator for today. And I'm joined by a really incredible set of panelists. Will and Jennifer are joining us from Juniper Creative. That is a public art collective that has made a really significant impact on our infrastructure here in Vermont, really changing the way that we engage with our public spaces. We have Meaghan from Evernorth, which is an affordable housing finance agency, formerly Housing Vermont, but now it's Evernorth is actually serving other parts of the northeastern region. And then we have Sal Millichamp, and Sal is a resident leader at Champlain Housing Trust Laurentide building. That's in the North End. And I've had the pleasure of working with all these panelists in different capacities. It's just, for me, it's a really amazing opportunity to bring these voices to the same table and think about resident agency in the space that they're living in, how and why it's important for folks to have agency, to have an impact, to feel a choice in the space that they're living in. And so before I start passing the mic and let us hear from our amazing voices that have joined us today, I'm going to do like a brief Fair Housing Month spiel. So if you're here today, you probably know that April is Fair Housing Month. We celebrate the passing of the Fair Housing Act of 1968 every April here at CVOEO's Fair Housing Project. And we do that through a variety of educational and creative events, including our Fair Housing Friday series and a host of other events, from the Heart and Home Project to our partnership with the libraries. And there's events happening all across Vermont. So I'll do a little, like at the end, I'll just highlight a couple of things to keep in mind. Of course, I've introduced Jennifer and Will from Juniper Collective or Creative, really incredible public artists, Meaghan from Evernorth, and Sal from Champlain Housing Trust Laurentide. And then just to say, so the reason why we celebrate the passing of the Fair Housing Act is it's important for us to take that time to recognize that we have certain protections here in Vermont and across the country due to the Fair Housing Act. So that is, the Fair Housing Act has enshrined into law protections for the 7 national protected classes, including race and color of your skin. That's really the reason why the Fair Housing Act came into being, but it was expanded to include a country of national origin, religion, sex, family status, and disability. And each state has the opportunity to kind of expand on the Fair Housing Act. Not all states do. There's different perspectives about the kind of pros and cons for adding more protected classes to the Fair Housing Act. But here in Vermont, we have expanded on it to include gender identity, sexual orientation, marital status, receipt of public assistance. So subsidies such as your housing choice voucher or Section 8 voucher. Age is protected here in Vermont, and income of prospective residents. That's kind of a complicated one that we can always have a longer conversation about. And then most recently, victims of abuse, sexual assault, and stalking. And while Fair Housing Month is a time to celebrate that these protections are enshrined in federal law, it's also a time to recognize that we have a long way to go to give everyone equal access to safe, stable, and affordable homes. Probably if you're on this call, you already know that Vermont has a really intense housing crisis. We have not enough homes for the people who live here. And really all across the country, different communities are grappling with their housing shortage. And that's why it's important. Oh, and so what that means is that not everyone actually has equal opportunity in housing choice. So the purpose of the Fair Housing Act is not, it's not fulfilled. We still have work to do to get there. And knowing that not everyone has equal opportunity to housing choice, so they can't choose where they live, it's really important for us as advocates and makers and community members to think about ways that we can create more opportunities for choice in our neighborhoods, especially for the folks living in affordable or subsidized housing. And so that brings us to why we're here today. I think it's, we're going to start with Meaghan from Evernorth. And Meaghan, if you could just introduce yourself and your work too. Just, I don't think my really super brief introduction totally did that service, but you could do a better job.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm just going to jump in sharing my screen and I'll give a little spiel about my organization and my role there. Let's see. All right. So as Corinne mentioned, and actually first I want to back up and just say thank you to CVOEO and Corinne and Jess for all the work you've done to organize these activities. I see it expand every year and I think it's really great. I'm really honored to be on this panel with everyone and talk about this important subject. So Evernorth, as Corinne mentioned, we are a affordable housing nonprofit. We used to be called Housing Vermont, but we recently merged with another organization. So we also work in New Hampshire and Maine. Today, I'm just going to focus on our work in Vermont. We develop, invest, and co-own a bunch of properties here in Vermont. Actually, just looked it up and it's over 3,000 households that we have put out there in the world and are occupied by residents, majority of which are making less than 60% area median income. So low to moderate income families. And my program is called the Connections Program. It started in 2016, and it's kind of our arm that focuses on resident services and helping our partners deliver the highest quality resident services. Some of the types of projects our department's been working with real estate development on are new construction. You can see in the center there, that's Sal's home, Laurentide. That was a brand new building created in the new north end of Burlington. We also have renovations of buildings that we purchased that are kind of not well maintained. And over to the right, you can see New Avenue, which is in downtown St. Johnsbury. And then we also work on projects where we have co-owned a building for a while and it needs a facelift. It needs an influx of resources. And so to the left there, you can see Tuttle Block and downtown Rutland that we are actually in the process. In the next couple months, the residents will be able to move back into their newly, freshly done apartment and community. Those projects tend to be challenging because we do have existing residents to relocate and try to make that process as smooth as possible. So that just give you a scope of what we are doing. And next, just an overview of what drew us to starting to engage residents throughout the design process and including their voices is from the developer perspective. We saw examples of us investing in community spaces and them going unused. And to us, that's a failure. We didn't necessarily design it with our community in mind. And so we want to minimize cases of those. Also, in those situations, sometimes it puts a burden on the property manager to invest in alterations to accommodate resident needs after the fact. And we'd really like to kind of avoid that. And then also, like the example in Title Block, it helps to create like transparency when we engage the residents throughout the process and they, you know, gain community buy-in for this transition. And most importantly are the resident benefits. I think when residents have engaged in these process or our process, they have realized just and gained confidence in their ability to contribute to the community as a whole. I think they often feel valued and more seen when we take the time to slow down and hear from them about what they would like to see in their community. We've also seen tenants build relationships between each other during this engagement process, learning that they're sharing the same experience that they might not have otherwise been aware of. And then the ultimate outcome is having an influence on designs and programs that are in their community. And you can see to the right, just an example of like one of the ways that we've tried to create engaging activities for residents to give us feedback in different ways. This is obviously a list of pros and cons about the laundry room and things that we can do better, things that are going well. And that helps us, we kind of have a design standard document and it helps inform how we're going to design buildings or what we think is like the ideal best practice. So I want to give some background on how this has evolved at our organization. It started in 2019 with a couple post-occupancy surveys. So we would send surveys out to residents who have lived in a new building for about a year. So at that 1 year mark, we kind of people have an idea of what's working and what's not working. And we were able to, at that time, if say a resident had a door that was malfunctioning, we could address it under a warranty period and really give them a chance to test everything out, but also address it in a timely way at that 1 year mark. The next year in 2021, we continued with those surveys and expanded upon them. And we included pre-rehab surveys. So that Title Block example, really trying to give residents an opportunity to let us know what features aren't working in their apartment, what are their specific needs in their apartment, and incorporating that in our conversations with architects and other designers. And then in 2022, we continued those surveys, but we added this focus group component. I think we're all very excited and have seen really good feedback through this. And we've done 3 focus groups, kind of the cases I mentioned at the beginning, those buildings. And this year we've tried to advance it further by establishing a staff committee that's really dedicated to making this a standard process so that it's not just for projects where, you know, a certain developer likes this idea, but we really are trying to standardize it for all projects so that we really are designing with residents and not just for them. So I'm going to give a couple examples of the focus groups and what we've learned and how we've kind of solicited information. So this is the Title Block focus group. I didn't include resident photos because I did not have permission. I wanted to be respectful, but you can see we put posters around the room and we gave them Post-it notes to indicate whether they use the space always, sometimes, or never, to give us an idea what the priorities are. And we went around and listed different ways you would use a community space. And so what some of the things we learned here is that residents always wanted to use a community space to print documents. We had no idea that so many people had like smartphones and devices, but no way to print, say, an application they needed to submit. And so we worked with property management to discuss where we would put that, what education we'd need, who would be responsible for keeping it supplied, those sorts of things. And then another thing we learned was that people this community didn't want comfy furniture. They didn't want like sit and, relax and binge movies. Like they were like, we don't want to walk into the community room and find someone like asleep on the couch. Like I want maybe a little bit more adaptable for, private events and big meetings. And so that was really helpful and definitely informed our design. One thing I wanted to mention a little bit earlier is that whenever we survey our residents or do a focus group, we prioritize like giving gift cards out, and we ask like what kind of gift card would they want, like something local or something like a Visa, just to make sure we're compensating residents for their time. And then we also, with the focus groups, we'll always include food as an incentive as well, just to make sure that it's not just us pulling information from the community, but we're able to give back in ways. We also work to set aside like a budget each time that we can use towards changes that we hear from them. And then one other thing we do is at the end of each of these kind of strategies or activities, we meet with property management and we talk through how we can implement these changes or what changes we aren't able to. And we share all the feedback through distributing a letter to all residents in the community saying, this is what we heard, this is what we can work on, this is things that we're not able to address for XY reason. And I think that's really helped build trust and like transparency that, there are going to be things that we aren't able to address, but we want to make sure we explain why that is or what barriers we're facing. So this is a chart that was in one of those reports. And you can see that we kind of weighted the scale, and the top things that the Tuttle Block community wanted was a place to share a meal, hold private events, and print documents. One resident said that they would like to use the room for a baby shower and that they had a really big family and they could picture all of them coming in. And so we made sure to pick out furniture that could be stored away, but also offer a lot of space for those sorts of things. We also added a sink into the community room because if you're preparing meals, it's really essential to have that. And it wasn't originally in the design. And so we jumped right on that idea and switched it up to make sure that that was part of it. This community also was really into art. They would set up a table in the hallway to do artistic cards and things like that. And so we made sure to add like built-in cabinets so that they can store all their art supplies there, and the sink will help with, cleaning up those activities as well. So, so that was our first one. We learned some really great information, but it is just a small group. And so we want to continue to do this, recognizing that each community is going to be unique in what they want to see. So we're going to keep going here. Here's an example of another activity kind of similar that we did at Laurentide, where we put a floor plan down. We kind of highlighted the spaces that we were curious about and asked a similar question of how often do you use this space? Is it always, do you sometimes use it? Are you never in this space? And it kind of, forces us to be a little bit more critical about things that we are standardizing. For example, bike storage. Only one person said that they always use it. And it's something that I think in general, we set as a standard in all our buildings. I know Laurentide had 3 bike storage areas. So something that we learned through that process. We also learned that access to the community room wasn't always clearly communicated. So we created a document posted outside the door to really instruct people about how to access it, what opportunities, what resources were in there, supplies. And we also heard some feedback about the package room. There were dollies in there, but I guess not enough to really meet the need of that community. Some people would use them to bring all their groceries up to their unit and forget it there. And so we just spent a little bit more money adding some more dollies to that package room for them as well. There were some other changes that were coming down the pipe, but had some barriers to them. This is another example of a graph that we shared with all the residents, kind of giving an overview of the feedback, the spaces that, you know, for us that we need to focus more on. The laundry room, the trash area, and the package room were the top three. So we took that as we need to be really intentional about those designs. People spend a lot of time in it, and maybe we need to ask even more questions of how that's working or not working for residents. And one resident had a really, really good point. They said that in this building, there were 2 and 3 bedroom units, and those were designed with laundry hookups with the assumption that the common laundry rooms would only be serving those smaller units. But in practice, that's not the case. And so there was way more people using the laundry that was there than we anticipated. And so it's something that we're going to look deeper at this year to evaluate how we come up with that number, and is it really fitting the needs of our community. And this is one of my favorite examples of a failure. So this is New Avenue in St. Johnsbury, and we had probably 11 residents at this community meeting, and they have a really, really beautiful community room. And sorry about my messages here. And no one was using it. I think only one person mentioned that they were using this space. And if you can notice here, we have some bar stools, a really nice kitchen, but what we heard is these bar stools are too tall. People couldn't even sit on these bar stools. So someone up in the process thought it was a really like nicely designed, picturesque kind of style here, but it wasn't functional for the residents. And so that was something we could easily address and fix. And then another thing is they had this beautiful kitchen, but there weren't any dishes or pots or anything you would need to host a meal. And so we jumped on that as well, ordering a bunch of stuff to supply the kitchen. And actually one thing that came out of that is they have an AmeriCorps who's now going to do a cooking class and offer it to residents as a result of that. Oops. All right. And so this is one of those graphs too that came out of New Avenue when we asked what the benefits and challenges were. And you can see that I am so sorry. I have another training that I'm supposed to be in. But the top challenges is they wanted to be able to like watch a basketball game together in the room. And there wasn't any kind of TV that they could share and have a movie night or anything like that. And they really desired that. So that was one of the main things that they told us. And so we added a smart TV to that space as well. The bar stools, as I mentioned, were mentioned tons of times. And then the lack of table space. They actually had 2 community spaces, big furniture, but like no end tables, no coffee tables to really do much on it. So if we looked at that, and we also are addressing that with getting kind of flexible furniture that they could pull in when they want to do like a big meal in those spaces. And I think this last quote really sums up like why we do this. Is one of the residents there said, I'm really glad you guys did this because these are really beautiful rooms and they're not being used. So that's our end goal, is really to hope that by engaging residents, sharing this decision making, that there's benefits on both sides and we can do a better job at building and creating communities that really serve the people who are living in it. So yeah, and that was all I had. I might have run through my time, but
thanks so much, Megan. Yeah, it's funny. I like, as soon as I pass the mic, I'm like, thank God it's not me anymore. Like that, like at beginning of like, oh, like I'm from like going through my script, but that was really helpful. I think those specific examples are just really important for us to be thinking about, and the assumptions that we don't even know we have when we're providing housing. And thinking about Will and Jennifer, like a much different like entry to thinking about agency and shared spaces. It's funny. So my background was as a resident organizer before I worked for the Fair Housing Project, and I think about how when I was organizing resident meetings, it was really hard to get people to show up. But I've been at the wall with Jennifer and Will, and I've seen people show up who, like, even if you're just kind of like, painting, it's not like a formal community day, like people want to ask questions and get involved. Just as a quick, for folks not familiar with Juniper Creative's work, you really have to look it up. As soon as you see it, you'll know that it's part of the fabric of our lives here. And most recently, y'all finished a mural at the YMCA, which I'm really excited to see in person. So yeah, I was wondering if you could talk about, from your lens, how public art and engaging community in public art creates a sense of agency in space.
You go ahead, Jennifer. We talk about this at home all the time, so it's something that is very close to the mission of what we do, is to get people involved, and we like to, cultivate just an atmosphere of fun. Creating art should be an enjoyable experience. Mm-hmm. And during that process, things do get intense, especially from the social justice lens that we reflect. But you want to add on, Jennifer?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's spot on.
Yeah.
The reason why we chose to focus on community murals is because I have a background in using creative expression to help college students mm-hmm. find a sense of belonging, especially students who come from marginalized backgrounds in predominantly white institutions. And so giving them agency in finding their voices, developing their identities as college students, and doing that through creative expression was important to their persistence in their college experience and getting to graduation. And so bringing that work into the work that we do in community murals was seamless for me. And Will came to Vermont from doing community-based work in public art and beautifying blighted communities and, neighborhoods that have been, fallen into disrepair because of landlords not taking care of their residents, taking care of the properties, and being able to put a paintbrush in a community member's hand and say, you know what, come join us, participate in this, help us tell this story, has been at the heart of all of the work we've done here in Vermont.
And just to add on to that, prior to moving to Vermont, I was the founder and ED of a grassroots nonprofit called SAGE Coalition. And SAGE stood for Styles Advancing Graffiti's Evolution. So I will organize graffiti, street artists, and just community members. We were going to neighborhoods that were, I would say, 50% abandoned. So these buildings were just eyesores owned by slumlords. And over the course of 3 days, we will organize artists, kids, community members, whoever was out there, to paint every abandoned building. And we would cover the entire city block in the course of 3 days. And that event went on throughout the city of Trenton for 5 years. That work is what got the attention of my niece, who was one of Juniper's students, got me to Vermont. The rest is history. But what we would do was very controversial work. You know, this was prior to like social media the way it is now. So a lot of the stuff that we were doing was flyers, just going to different places, telling people what we were doing. It was very, very boots to the ground. And, you know, most of the time, you know, the permission was very uneven. So we would have, you know, I would get permission from the people that lived there, so more so than the slumlords who owned these buildings. And the last event I did like that was in 2016. I remember one of the slumlords actually came out. We're painting this giant mural on the side of the building. And she was like, you have to remove that mural. I was like, well, the people in this community who's been living with this building for decades, there's a tree growing inside of it, for God's sake. No one's doing anything with the building. You know, there's crack vials everywhere. Like, you're obviously not upkeeping this property. So, and you're coming at me for painting a mural with the community. We cleaned up an abandoned lot, which was full of trash. You know, this whole block was just disgusting. And we cleaned it up in the course of a week. And she was coming at me and said, well, I want to get the police involved. The cops actually came out and had my side, because by that point, I had already developed a reputation for just going around doing this, you know? And then we even got even deeper. We researched the building that she was complaining about and found out that she was 10 grand in back taxes, you know? So needless to say, that was almost 10 years ago. That mural's still up to this day, right? So it's just about having the gall to go out there and like, you know what? I'm tired of looking at this. I'm tired of having these eyesores in my neighborhood, and it's not difficult to get a little bit of paint, a few brushes, and put some music on and have a party. And that's really how it started. It was that simple. It was like, yo, let's compile our resources. None of us really have money. You know, we're all living in these areas, but it doesn't have to look like this. You know, just taking advantage of the opportunity to do something, regardless of who may complain, because at the end of the day, we're just slapping paint on walls. You know, we're not hurting anyone. You know, we may be bruising some egos, you know, and bruising some sensibilities, but at the end of the day, what's the outcome if nothing is done? Like, what's the outcome if we don't take a chance, if we don't take the risk and making something better than what it was, or leaving a place better than what you came into it? And we're getting people who've never painted to participate. That work has evolved into the work we do with Juniper Creative, because most of the people who come to our events don't have an arts background. And the one thing we consistently get is like, oh, well, what if we mess it up? It's like, well, you can't, you know, because at the end of the day, we're going to figure it out together. We're going to show you basic techniques that you can teach anyone, and you'll be surprised at what you can do if you just take a chance. You're not graded. You know, this is not something that you're going to be judged upon, because we have enough experience to make sure that it looks good no matter where it's placed. You know, and it's just that simple. How can we use arts to have fun and say something? You know, education doesn't have to be boring, doesn't have to be tedious, you know? So you'd be surprised at how much people will share with you when you actually create a space that they could be comfortable and express themselves.
And part of our creative process in community murals involves allowing people to have agency, individuals have agency in creating their individual pieces of artwork that we collage into the mural, and it becomes part of a collective whole composition. And most of you have seen this work around Burlington. They look like mosaics on walls, but they're individual pieces of artwork making up one big image. And that's where people have the most fun. You know, that's where they're willing to take the most risk. And, you know, philosophically, community murals are about helping a community tell their story, helping a community take agency and accountability over what they're contributing to. So even though we're creating these, you know, these works of art in areas that we are not residents of, because we leave, including community members in that creative process means they then take ownership of the artwork.
And tell the story.
They'll tell the story. They'll protect the art. They'll defend the art. And that's even more powerful than what we've done. You know, we came in and we facilitated the process, but then we turned over the final product into that community.
We tell people, I'm sorry to jump in, but you just reminded me of something. Now we tell people all the time, it's like, we're coming in more like as coaches, you know, and we also like to play, you know, so it's like, but we have enough experience to make sure that the end result is something that's refined and that clearly states exactly what our intentions are. You know, people are going to see these public works and they're going to develop their own narrative, you know, and people are always going to see something that we don't see. They're going to have their own relationship with it, right? But the story is just as important as the final outcome. So when we tell people like, yo, this is how it started, this is where we come from, and these are our intentions, and we're opening it up for a conversation to help facilitate the concept of what's going to be created. So you have to be fluid in this work, you know? So it's like, we're coming in, but we're able to zigzag through different obstacles, different conversations, different levels of intensity, because we're experienced in all that. The way we started this work, you know, prior to us coming together, we had to jump through just as many hurdles. Juniper was in a higher ed realm. I was in a grassroots urban area. And each one comes with its own set of obstacles, and we've been successful in those worlds. So when we started Juniper Creative, we had already had a very high level of confidence in exactly what we wanted to put out into the world. And people see that, you know, and people are attracted to that, you know, because we are leaders in that respect. So we have to be willing to make sure that the people who we have involved in these projects have a sense of comfort to know that we're not going to take them in the direction that is something that they can't figure out, you know. And we've had several times where people have come up to us and expressed their disdain for what we're doing because of either the subject matter of our work or the fact that they feel that they're not involved. And it's like, yo, well, there's a paintbrush, there's a bucket, get to work. You know, it's like at the end of the day, you still have to show up. You can't come at the end and tell like, well, we didn't know. Well, that's not our problem, because we've been very public. You know, our work gets a tremendous amount of press. Most of the time that people have come up to us is literally because of the race of the figures in our walls. It's very black and white with the people who have given us negative feedback. And we've had several occasions where it was very tense, you know, like our backs are turned 90% of the time. So we don't know what can happen to us, but we're very confident in the fact that, you know, we believe in what we're doing and we're willing to take the risk. It's not easy work. It could be very dangerous at times, especially at the peak of the pandemic and the racial uprisings. You know, not too many people in this state look like us or do what we do, you know, especially from a place of social justice. So we have to take all that into consideration anytime we sign up to do a project, to the fact that we have to make sure that we're protected and that we have enough confidence to make sure we see it through, because these aren't projects that we just go in and do in a few days. Each project takes at least a month or more. You know, we move into these neighborhoods. Like Jennifer said, we're not from most of these communities that we're serving. So we expect there to be.
We set up shop there.
We set up shop there, and
you know, we're you know, contributing to the economy because we're shopping in the grocery stores or patronizing every local restaurants. You know, we're getting to know the people who in the area, you know. And when Meaghan was talking about participatory design, I didn't have that language before, not realizing that some of the, you know, I built an entire multicultural center at an elite private white, predominantly white in college here in Vermont, by bringing students to the table saying, they gave us this building, let's go. Like, what do you want to see here? Putting papers up around the entire building, every room, should be in this room, what should happen. And within a year later, I implemented everything that those students wanted. And to this day, everything that was created still exists. And I'm not there anymore.
But also too, once we started doing murals at her center, we just recently found out that the students now initiate their own projects.
Yeah.
Where that culture had never existed prior to what Jennifer had created there.
So we seeded community murals as part of creating a sense of belonging, creative expression. When Will came to Vermont, started at the center, which was his niece was part of the collective of students that worked with me in creating, the bare bones of the center initially. And they had this envision, like, we need to have murals in this place. We're like, great, hold on. We know exactly who we're gonna bring in to like help usher this in for us. And because, we're in rural Vermont, most of the students of color were coming from urban centers. Yeah. So having murals was normal for their everyday, for their everyday lives, walking into this building and feeling like they were walking into, someplace in Brooklyn or the Bronx, or Harlem, where I'm from. And it was, or, even some of them going to Montreal and saying, oh my God, look what's there and look at what we have here in this place. Yeah. So that was really important to helping folks establish, feeling like they had a place somewhere, that placemaking is so important in everything. So many people are making decisions. I mean, we see it all the time, politicians are making decisions for the people, but yet none of those initiatives actually are benefiting the people that they claim they are for, right? Like we see that all the time with institutions that operate on these hierarchies.
Yeah. And the thing that like really sticks with me with what you said is the one thing. I'm like, we need to have this be like a whole long series of conversations. But that moment of, it's not just engaging people, it's engaging the people that are like othered or silenced or don't feel comfortable in that space, and really saying like, this is your space. Like, how do we give agency to you? How do we allow you to have an impact? And I think that's something really important when we're talking about affordable housing and subsidized housing, because the reality is that we don't, if you need a housing subsidy, you already have a limit to where you can choose to live. And so how do we say, like, if you don't have a lot of choice in where you live, how do we give you space to feel like you still belong, that you still have choice and agency? And I want to hear from Sal real quick too, before we open it up for our questions. And because Sal lives in affordable housing, not that it's so different from other kinds of apartments, but I do know that Sal has been a significant leader in her building, thinking about bringing in art, bringing in gardening, bringing in parks and rec. How do we give space for what the residents need? How do we give space for what the kids need? That's a big thing that comes up. Anyway, so I'll just pass the mic to you, Sal.
All right, thanks a lot, Corinne. And thank you, Megan, and thank you, Will and Jennifer. I love everything that you all are saying, and I keep thinking about listening. We have to listen to the people what they want, and then we can move on from there. And I think that's what all of you have said. I moved into Laurentide. My husband Bernie and I moved in as soon as it opened, and it was so exciting to see so many different people. We live in a diverse community in Laurentide. It's wonderful, lots of languages. I'd say we're finally getting to connect again. In the beginning, Corinne came with some other artists, and we were doing art, and we were doing potlucks, but then COVID happened, and then it was pretty bad. Everybody felt shut down. Can we talk? Somebody's not wearing a mask, or somebody is wearing a mask. A lot of challenges and a lot of COVID. but the connections are strong, and my background is social work. I'm retired. I'm do this because I love it. I want to connect with my neighbors. I want to know who they are. I want them to know who I am. We can just say hi in the hallways, but for us to connect and talk about what our concerns are or what our joys are. I started a coffee hour to couple hours every Thursday. So, we're living in affordable housing. We need affordable housing. So we decided we would ask Panera. If you all don't know it, if you call Panera, they'll give away their leftovers. So every Wednesday night we go and get the leftovers, and sometimes they'll give you up to 4 boxes. We're always hoping for just 2, and lay out all the food on Thursday morning, and have coffee, and whoever shows up, shows up. And we're trying to get the other buildings to come over too, because we're going to have so many buildings here. We need to be heard. We need to know what the concerns are as early as possible. It's kind of a hangout time. For me, I look forward to Thursdays because I can sit still, because I do other things like teach swim classes. And it was so exciting to see that mural that Juniper and Will were working on. I remember stopping and saying something to you, Juniper, and you turned around and you were up on this high thing painting. It was such a beautiful mural. But anyway, back to Laurentide. So there's projects with the park next door. We'll connect with them. And, when we all moved in, there's large families. A lot of them are from Somalia. And it's kind of like how we, big families are. Take your brothers and sisters and go play. And I've got a lot of things to do. Of course they do. They have big families. And so the playground is a wild time. And so with people who are not kid focused, there's grumbling there. So to get to people to know the children to know them. I always feel like once you know a person's name, there's a connection. And just hanging out at the playground is a nice place to be. The big thing that I've done recently is I felt kind of, the older kids didn't really have much to do. They've got these climbing things for smaller kids, and then the big kids start throwing the ball and it gets really wild. But in the winter, it's there's not much. So I really wanted a ping pong table, and Champlain Housing Trust has a dinner, which is amazing. They have a dinner in the winter time, and I was going in to look for the bankers because I figured I'd get a ping pong table. But CHT, when they heard what I was looking for, the bankers to buy a ping pong table, they said, we'll get you one. So now the older kids, they're usually in their like 4th grade up. We meet, and they're getting better. Soon, I bet they'll be able to beat me, but that's kind of the goal right now, is for them to beat me in ping pong. And we haven't really got a good schedule yet. We haven't had it too long, but just to have those interactions, and art's always good. We have a really great SASH worker, which means support services at home. And it's supposed to be for older folks who are on Medicaid, but the person we have, Eilish, she will try and help anyone. So she's a wonderful person that will come and do jewelry once a week, or have bingo. And if somebody else wants to come in, she's very welcoming. So we're gaining more activities again, and connecting with each other and stopping and talking in the hallways about the struggles. We have had a lot of struggles in COVID. During that time, we have apartments that are set up for people coming out of homelessness. And some of the struggles are hard. The addictions are still going on, and bringing in people who are not ready, and a lot of that was a really, really hard time. But we all rallied together, and when we weren't feeling heard, we somehow were able to get the community room, and we did keep it to the small amount of I told them we just needed a meeting. We were having a few people, but we just kept it to a few people, and then they had to leave. So we worked on an email saying all of the things that we were concerned about. And then I would write it down and tell the person what I'd written down. And if that was correct, then they were okay with that. And then they had to leave, and other people came in because of COVID. It could only have a small number. But then the email was sent out, and Champlain Housing Trust got back with her and us, and then we all worked together to feel heard. That was the main thing, to feel heard. I'm not sure everything got fixed right away, but to feel heard and know that they're working towards getting things better. What COVID did do, which was a plus, was the rental assistance. The rental assistance, where people were struggling so much financially, and we had food coming in from the restaurants that we would pass out, and laundry. Laundry is often an issue when the washing machines break down, and then or else we'd have to pay a quarter, where big buildings, nobody pays any money, and people are struggling to find quarters. They're beating on your door saying, do you have a quarter? And you need it $1.25, I think. So I'm glad what has turned out is we don't have to pay for laundry. That is a huge plus. It's just it's just a relief, because people don't have $1.25 sometimes. They don't have that many quarters. And anyway, I feel like I'm so grateful that I live at Laurentide. We're getting more and more connected, and I am grateful that Corinne came in the beginning with the artist and worked to get us all together, and it continues. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Sal. And something that you said that really struck me was that moment of, if you know someone's name, it just changes things. And it's amazing how many conflicts kind of can just fizzle out if you the kid, hey, we talked about this, and they respond, right? And I do think about all the time, Sal, you do a lot of labor in your community, and it takes time, and it takes a certain way of thinking, a certain way of organizing that not everyone has, especially in subsidized communities where people are really spread very thin. And so how do we make space in communities for folks that might not have a Sal in the building? In our last 2 minutes, I know that I said a big Q&A. If you have a question, please email it to us. Feel free to stick it in the chat. I do just want to hear final thoughts from each of our panelists, because so much was shared, and I want to have that moment where we just land on the final the thing you want to say. Does that sound good for our panelists who are just being put on the spot? Megan, do you want to start, or do you want to be second?
I can start. I think what comes to mind in all of this is the idea of honoring people's experience and recognizing them as experts. I think that's a social worky thing, but I think that is very clearly a theme I hear through all of it is, in the murals, we work with community members, and they're really driving it. And the same with our work, we want our residents to be driving what changes and what we develop. And I think Sal does the same with her neighbors, really honoring them, recognizing them, and helping to empower their voices on another level. So yeah, I think that's my reflection.
Thanks, Megan. How about Jennifer and Will? Rock, paper, scissors. You each can have half a sentence. I'm just kidding.
One of the things that came to me, especially when Sal was speaking, was, the the exhaustion that can come from organizing, you know.
Mm.
And Jennifer and I had to take stock of our energetic level at the end of last year, and we went into this year at a more of a steady pace instead of a rapid one, as we've been going at the past couple of years, because it was starting to take a toll on our health, you know, physically and mentally. It's, you know, we were having this conversation about a month ago or so, where we were talking to a client where we was like, well, we've only been home a couple months in the past 2 years, you know, because we're out in the world doing this work. And we didn't realize how much of a toll it was taking on us and our family and our home, because we were giving so much of ourselves and we weren't recharging our own battery, you know. And this work is very time consuming. You know, one of the things that happened with COVID, you know, was, of course, it was a tough time, right, for across the board. But one of the things that Jennifer and I realized is that we had also a gift of time to do this work at a time where it was more needed than at any time in our life, you know. But in doing and using that time to do this work and seed our you know, our ideology, our methods, our business, we were taking so much from ourselves and weren't recharging our own well, you know. So just having just finding that balance and doing the work and also making sure that we're taking care of ourselves.
Yeah. And I just want to take a quick second to actually respond to Haley's question in the chat. Yeah, it's there. So usually who initiates those projects, Haley, are the organizations that bring us into those communities. We've really, like, the way our process has challenged and has challenged the typical public art process around community engagement. When what we tried to explain earlier was, you know, when you hear us talk about like this community engagement, community murals, this stuff is happening in real time. We don't typically, it's a rare occasion that we already show up with a design in hand.
Very rare.
And most are like request for proposals for public art requires you to have a design already in hand that a committee has chosen that is, quote unquote, a representative body of that community. And most of those people are making those decisions really about their own personal taste, right? And so, and then the community engagement becomes an afterthought in that creative process. And so we don't apply for RFPs, right? So people, if they know what we offer, they know what we have to deliver, they like our aesthetic, and they believe in our mission, so they just source us directly. And we are brainstorming with community, coming up with a design. All this is happening real time. People are surprised how quickly, like, we can come up with a design after a 3-hour visioning workshop, and we're like ready to go. Okay, outline on the wall, and workshops, community paint days, like all this is happening in such a fast pace.
And one of the hardest things is picking the colors, because people ask us like, oh, what colors are going to use? We're like, we're going to find out, because we want to design the mural in conjunction with the community. So we typically use just the colors of the rainbow, because it's like we have every color, because we typically, that's always the hardest part, because it's done on the spot. There isn't any type of like Jennifer said, we don't come in with a already fabricated idea. It's like, hey, we have a conversation where we're going to take this. And also too, especially when we're working with young people, letting them know that whatever we do come up with, they have to be brave enough to defend, because you can't please everyone. That's the sure way of failing at anything when you're trying to please everybody. It's like, what do you want to say? What's your truth? How can we illustrate and paint that on the wall together?
And we work on strengths-based, right? So if we're going to always tap into where people want to shine, and offer opportunities for people to take risks as well.
That's right.
Yeah, man, that like the moment of the assumptions that like when, oh, here's my equitable design, you know, and that's something that I think that we all are familiar with in all the different realms of work that we do. So that's a really good thing to kind of put your finger on. Okay, and then Sal, any last thoughts?
Well, I just want to say I saw it happening with Will and Jennifer. It was great. I would see them with that paper down and working on it. It was really fabulous, and it's amazing. And I guess the same thing that you said, that I said before, that connection. Once you know somebody's name and you've passed them in the hall a few times and had a few words, or understand that everybody's going through something, and you can be a neighbor. You can be a neighbor, and we can connect and be supportive to each other. It doesn't have to be, you know, I don't have to fix your problem, but I am your neighbor and I can listen.
It might have $1.25 for the lunch. I was like, it's just nice that they feel comfortable, you know, like that there is that like repertoire, that there's that community. It's like asking for the sugar, you know. I think that's something really special. And I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists. I mean, I knew it would be an incredible conversation. I feel like we could do this like every week and still have more to say. And honestly, like I cannot express enough how kind of amazing it is to have like these three really different lenses that are all talking about the same thing, which is like community connection, community agency, get the voices in the room who like don't have space and give them space, right? Give people choice. Thank you so much for joining us for this Fair Housing Friday. Thank you everyone for staying on the call and forgiving us for going over. And, you know, stay tuned. I'll be sending an email with kind of some links from this conversation, some links from some of the projects that people have referenced, some notes from what we've talked about. And there's also another Fair Housing Friday coming up next week, so please feel free to join us then. And always, you know, stick with us. Let's keep talking about housing, and let's keep thinking out of the box and thinking about how we can make our communities more centered around the people that live there, right? For not just the select few that have the big ideas that are, you know, maybe the chair that's too close to the countertop. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I hope to keep seeing you around. And again, a big round of applause for our panelists.